Okay. Okay, so we talked about image acquisition, device limit, and tonal reproduction. HDR images, this is something that you may have heard about. What we're trying to do with HDR images is we're trying to capture more of a dynamic range. So how this works in a camera is you bracket your exposures. So you would capture an image with just a regular exposure, and then you would overexpose on another image and underexpose on another image. So you have essentially 3 exposures of the same image, and then you can run these into Photoshop and it will be able to sandwich them all together. So this is an example of an HDR image. Here we took just a normal exposure, and you can see the midtones look okay. The highlights are blown out, and there's really not a lot of detail in the shadow areas. So then we open up the exposure, or we stop down actually. So we underexpose, and what we get is highlights are captured, but the shadow areas block up, okay? And then we do the opposite. We go the other way, and we overexpose, and that gives us detail in the shadows, but it blows out the highlight areas. So what Photoshop does is it will take sort of the best of each one of these images and fuse it together into this HDR image. Okay, HDR images are especially handy when you're dealing with an environment that is a very high dynamic range. So think of if you're trying to photograph like a white t-shirt in the middle of a desert. You know, you've got mid-afternoon sun, very, very bright, and then you've got this white image, a white shirt. It's most likely going to blow out the details of the shirt. So this is another example of a high dynamic range environment where you've got the shadows in here and then the clouds, and Photoshop is able to maintain all of this and fuse it together into one image. That's HDR. So when you have something that's overexposed, sometimes people, that means that the highlight detail is lost. When something is underexposed, you could be losing shadow detail. You can see there's really no shadow detail here. So poor lighting or exposure compromises the picture quality by adding noise. We talked about that before. And it's important to get this right in the camera. So that, you know, there's only so far you can go with processing a poor image in Photoshop. It's best to get it right in the camera, in the field, or to get a properly exposed image, get it right, get the original right, and then you'll have a high quality file to work with. So at this point in the course, you guys should be familiar with some of the tools in Photoshop. I've put together this electronic imaging concepts quiz. This is not for credit, but I think it would be a good idea for you guys to just practice with it and see kind of where your knowledge is right now. And that is, I believe that is in module 3. Any questions thus far? Okay. We talked about this a little last week in terms of resolution. You know, we have different units of measurement. We have PPI, which is pixels per inch. That's the unit that we use for screens. Samples per inch for scanners, and pixels per, or dots per inch for printers, or lines per inch. And that is how many picture units of an image contains per inch of distance in the horizontal and vertical directions. So each unit of measurement behaves differently depending on the device. These are not interchangeable. Sometimes students try to use these interchangeably and it doesn't work. And I'll show you an example. Here we have dots per inch. We have 2880 dots per inch. Does not equal 2880 ppi. Not directly. You will see here people use these terms interchangeably, but just know in its truest sense, these are not the same. They're not the same thing. Reason being is a printer may put down several dots to produce one pixel. And this is a process called dithering. So you don't have this one-to-one equivalency between dots per inch and pixels per inch, okay? So printer resolution DPI, it's the number of ink dots printed on an inch of paper. Printers have an optimum image resolution, beyond which increasing the embedded resolution of the image, PPI, makes no discernible effect on the output of the quality. So sometimes I see students, when they're printing something out, they say to themselves, well, the optimum resolution of this printer is 1440. So what they'll do is they'll create their Photoshop file at 1440. You don't want to do that. It creates a massive file and it doesn't equate to any gain in image quality. So make sure that you're not using the optimum image quality of the printer, okay? Again, ink dots do not equal image pixels. Here's an example of where the student looked at the instruction manual for the printer, and it said it could print up to 1440. So they decided to create their file at that resolution versus something that's a workable resolution like 240. And you just have a massive file. You can see the difference here, a 13 megabyte file versus a 467 megabyte file. Once you get into, files that are hundreds of megs, you really start to see some performance hits also. It's very difficult to work on files that are these large, that are as large as these. So what is the right resolution? Totally depends. It depends on whatever your output is. If you're going to a printer, ask them what the optimal resolution is and go by that. It could be 280, it could be 300. 300 is sort of a rule of thumb, but it really depends on, where it's going. The resolution also that you decide to use is dependent on the viewing distance. So in this example, you have a billboard. If you were to design a billboard, you would not want to do something like 300 DPI or 1000 DPI for something like this. The file would be massive. You can use a much lower DPI because it's being viewed from so far away, okay? So in one of the videos, I talked about resizing images and the importance of getting the scan right. It's better to scan with the size that you need in the scanner versus underscanning something, bringing it into Photoshop, and then using Photoshop to blow it up. Because at that point, you're asking Photoshop to invent pixels. And when it invents pixels, it does this thing called interpolation or resampling. And generally speaking, you want to keep this off when you resize an image. You want to first play around with changing the resolution and see basically what you can get out of the image. If you can't get to the size that you need, then you turn on resampling. But just know that this resampling is kind of a last resort. So in this example, you have 2 pixels next to each other. You're expanding an image larger, and Photoshop says, well, I don't know what this pixel is, so I'll just average this pixel, and then it comes up with gray. So interpolation, resampling, it can result in a larger image in terms of resolution, but one that now has less clarity because you simply cannot produce something from nothing. Here's an example. We've taken an image and expanded it out, and this is what it would look like on the print. Any questions about that? So that's kind of the basics of image acquisition. Again, and I've got a video where I talk about this very thing. Remember that there is this relationship between pixel dimensions and resolution. And that's expressed with this little icon here, this relationship. Whenever you are resizing an image, you first want to turn this resampling off. Oops. Try testing to see how much resolution you can get out of your destination size. If it's adequate, then you're good to go. If not, then you would turn resampling back on. So just some tips. It's generally best to change the dimensions and resolution first without resampling, and then also to resize the image in Photoshop, not within the printer. That should be in Photoshop. And also, when it comes to making changes to your image, if you have the option to do some of these things in your camera, I recommend not doing them. Save that for Photoshop. If you decide that you want to take an image and you know it's going to be black and white, take it in color. Don't let the camera do anything. Let Photoshop do it. It'll do a better job. So does anybody have any questions or concerns? I do have this file. Let me see if I can attach it. You guys are more than welcome to download this file. In my face-to-face class, we go through, we spend about 20 minutes on this image, taking her out of the image. I've gone ahead and posted that image in the chat if you guys would like to download it and play around with it. It's a good exercise, and you can see some of the challenges, even by using kind of that shortcut method, that come up when you're trying to take her out of the image. So that's all I got for you guys tonight. Any questions about anything?
And can I
Yeah.
ask a question? So in an image like that, would it be acceptable to, instead of going in and changing the backgrounds and modifying, taking her out, just copying the bars, replacing the background with a graduated background to kind of match, because then you wouldn't have her shadow and stuff to deal with as well, and then touching up where the hands and stuff are around the bars?
Yes. Sometimes you have to draw. You have to just create something from nothing. So let's say you're working with, in project 1, you're working with an image where you have a highlight area that's just totally blown out. And what you want to do is you want there to be noise in there that matches the rest of the image, right? So in that case, you would be manufacturing something within Photoshop. You can just create noise in Photoshop. I always save that sort of manufacturing stuff for the very end. If I can't do it any other way, I'll just create it from scratch. But it's almost always going to look best if you are able to take the organic parts of the image. So there are things within that gradient that are not going to look as natural to try to replicate by using something like the radial gradient in Photoshop. You see what I'm saying? So I always try to take what's available. Sometimes if you're, I've done group shots where I've taken other people's eyeballs and move them over to, and it actually works. It's crazy. Sometimes, especially if they're family members, sometimes, brothers and sisters have very similar eye shapes and whatnot, and you can just take one and copy it over versus just manufacturing an eyeball from scratch. Yeah, so it's always best to kind of use what's available first, and then if you need to, because when you start manufacturing thing now, that kind of sometimes opens up a Pandora's box of other things that you're trying to finesse in order to get it to look natural. So anybody else?
I just need some clarification on our due dates.
Sure.
So project 1 is due on February 2nd, and we're also updating everyone on our progress for the project, and it's due that day too. So
No, which assignment are you talking about?
okay, so like how you set up, we have to like update people on Slack.
Correct.
On there. So I'm looking at the calendar, and it apparently everything is due on Tuesday, February 2nd.
Oh. Okay, I need to go back and look at that.
Because I was kind of confused.
Yeah.
I'm like, we're telling everybody about our progress, but it doesn't have to be completely finished. But then
Yeah.
our projects also do that.
Yeah, I don't think that is correct because, February 2nd is next week, and you haven't gone through even the colorization part. So I think what happened, I think I know what happened with this. When I migrated this over from an existing course, some of the dates didn't line up correctly. So I'll go back and change that. But I believe it should be due the following week. So next week would be the retouching one progress, and then the following week would be the following week would be February 9th, I believe, is when the project 1 should be due. But I'll go back through. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, thank you. And also the Slack and the exercise 3, that's basically doing the same thing, right? We're just updating everybody on Slack about what we just did.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, so just know project 1 is going to move a little bit. Because you can't do project 1 unless you know how to do colorization, and that's next week. So that's strange. I don't know why that is like that. Any other questions?
Also, how do you change the workspace like color profile on Photoshop? Because I'm not using the Adobe RGB, and it's just really bothering me when I try to edit photos on there.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, it's a different thing, and I don't really want to change it every single time manually.
Yeah, so that's if you go into File, Preferences. Geez, where is that? It's color settings is what we're looking for. Yeah, so here, color settings is under the edit menu. Shift Command K is the shortcut for that. So here, this is where you can set up your working space, and I have this set to sRGB, but it could be Adobe RGB.
Are you talking about that, Diana, or are you talking about the?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm
Okay.
talking about.
Yeah. So when you, what's happening is when you have an image that has a color profile embedded, that's different than the working space that you use in Photoshop, it will give you a warning. You can actually turn off those warnings. That's what this is right here, color management policies. If you just turn this off, you won't even get the warning that it was created in a different color space. But honestly, I recommend Adobe RGB just because it's a bigger color space, but there isn't a lot of dramatic difference between sRGB and Adobe RGB. It's just slightly bigger, not like the color difference in CMYK versus sRGB. That's pretty massive. So, either
Okay,
one
I
of
was
these.
just wondering which one was better too, because it's like, is it Adobe RGB? Because I've been using the sRGB as well, so I just didn't know which is the most optimal.
It really depends on what you do. So if you work in a photo studio, it's Adobe RGB. If you're working for a web company, your world is all sRGB. If you're working in print, obviously you're working in CMYK. But sRGB is just kind of the most compatible. But if you are doing just kind of strictly photography, which is really what we're doing in this class, that's why I encourage you to use Adobe RGB. Most photographers that I know that do their post work, they live in Adobe RGB because there's just more crayons in the box. So
Well, yeah, like everything that I migrate over from Lightroom, it's always giving me the Adobe RGB like little prompt there. So
yeah. If you just set this to your working space Adobe RGB, then it won't pop up.
yeah, I couldn't find the color settings. Like I kept looking through the preferences and I'm like, okay, why doesn't this exist? So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's very frustrating.
And just know also with color management, it's just think of this in terms of preview. It's not really changing the color information. It's just kind of like a lens that allows you to see within a certain color space. So sRGB, Adobe RGB, which by the way, if you guys are on a Mac, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about color spaces, but if you go to your utilities, I'm trying to think of where this is at, color grapher, I think. There's a program called, is it grapher? No, it's, I think it's the color sync utility. Yeah. So if you go open up the color sync utility, I feel like this offers a better explanation of what color spaces are because it's a visual representation of a color space. You can see here, this is Adobe RGB. If you come over here to sRGB, look at the difference. You can see in sort of the green area, there's like less greens, less yellows in the crayon box. It's just a different shape, but you can see, it is pretty clear to see that there are many more colors in the Adobe RGB color space than there is sRGB. And by design also, because sRGB was really meant for web work. Any other questions about that?
I have a question that is
Sure.
mainly about the project one. I sent you an image that I've been like tweaking a little bit with the blacks and white. There's this part the image. He's a sailor. He has like this like tie thing right in the neck. I'm not sure how to fix like because it's not showing it. It's just blocking it with the blacks. And I've been trying to put it like lighter and play with it around, but it's not bringing
Is
it out.
is this on Slack? Did you
Yes.
post this image on Slack?
No, in the chat right now, I sent it directly to you.
You sent it directly to me? Let's see.
Mhm.
Did you send it via email or?
No, just like you did with the image for us to download.
Okay. And it's not within the Slack. It's not within, you didn't post it within Slack.
No.
Okay. I can enable screen sharing if you want to show me on your screen what it looks like.
It doesn't want to work right now to put it like that. I don't know what's happening. My internet right now, it's just terrible.
You said you sent me the image?
Yeah, I just put it like how you posted in the chat, the image of the woman with bars.
Oh, you just put
Just
it
like that.
in this chat.
Yeah.
Okay, I see it here. It's a big image. Huh. Do you have a smaller, like a JPEG version of it?
I put it as a TIFF.
Yeah.
You want me to put it like the JPEG?
Yeah, the tip, it seems to be having an issue with, I think probably the
Okay.
size of it. Okay, so you say that in the shadow areas that you're trying to bring out detail that's not there?
Yeah. In the area of where he has like a tie kind of thing right here in the neck. It's not like showing, it's just like blending into the shirt.
Okay. Are you able to see my screen? Oh, this right here?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Let me see if I can open this up in Photoshop. So So the first thing I would do is look at the histogram. And I can see, I'm going to just bring up levels. You see how this like is kind of cut off here? Ideally, you want the histogram to look kind of like a mountain, right? It could have a couple peaks or it could have a single peak, but when you go beyond this area, that means that it's clipped, okay? So you can see this little area here. I don't know if there's any values higher than this, but they're gone. And that's fine. But this area right here is probably the shadow area. And you can see there is not a whole lot of detail. What I typically will do is open up the shadow areas just to see what's available. And it's ugly. Yeah, there's kind of no way around it. You know, you know, to some degree, you're going to have to you can extract some detail from this, but for the most part, there is just not a lot of detail there. You see, when I bring out the highlight areas, it's just, there just isn't. You can see these areas where this should be like a smooth transition from like this light gray to this darker gray. There isn't. And what you have here is called banding. So you see here, it's real spotty. It looks very noisy. There just isn't a whole lot of information in there. So, you know, do the best you can do. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. Yeah, you really can't. I definitely wouldn't try to darken this area.
I still have like an original version of it, so I can just work with that one instead of this one.
Oh, this is the process
I made
version?
sure to make a copy. Yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely go back to your original image. Yes. For this image,
I still have the original one.
okay. So for this image, I would look at maybe using curves, because with curves, assuming that you do have detail in the original image, you can put an anchor point here, and that will hold this area of the shadows. And then you can manipulate the rest of the image. You see what I'm saying? It just gives you more precise control. Because this image, you're not gonna want to do a whole lot, even if there is detail in here with the shadow areas, because it's probably just noise. Any other questions? Anybody else? All righty. Well, you guys have a good night. I have moved project 1 a week back, so it is not due next week. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know. We can set up a time to meet, or just email me. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. All right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You're welcome. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
All right. See you later.